We're live in 3, 2, 1.
Alright, so today I wanted to take a break from the usual videos. I've got a real bad throat today, as you can probably hear, and I've been feeling a little run down. So I just wanted to chill out for a bit while playing some wrestling video games, and I recorded some footage, so today we're going to talk about WCW Mayhem on the PlayStation 1. Apologies for the voice, guys. I know it doesn't sound good at the best of times, but today it is pretty bad, but I still wanted to put something out for you guys to watch. So, I owned this game way back when it came out, and straight up, I like WCW Mayhem way more than others. It doesn't look good today. The action in the ring feels limited when compared to World Tour and Revenge on N64, but I remember getting really into this one and I enjoyed it a lot, even though there were better options out there. So, take a break with me and let's play this game. This is WCW Mayhem. Ask anyone who played wrestling games back in the late 90s and early 2000s and most will agree that the AKI wrestling games were top of the mountain. I fully agree here, by the way. Virtual Pro Wrestling 1 and 2, WCW World Tour, Revenge, WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy were all very fun games that are still great to play today. The Nintendo 64 WCW games though were and still are pretty legendary. World Championship Wrestling had a good thing going with AKI and they probably didn't even know it. They had the very best wrestling games available in the US and Europe. WCW fans that owned PlayStations though, they were kinda screwed. WCW vs. the World was decent, it had a good roster, but it felt primitive when compared to WCW World Tour. And that's because WCW vs. the World was the localized version of Virtual Pro Wrestling, the first game to use AKI's wrestling engine and kinda serving as the blueprint for the excellent N64 games. For whatever reason, the next PlayStation 1 WCW games used a totally different developer and engine. WCW Nitro and WCW Thunder were developed by Inland Productions while THQ remained the game's American and European publisher. AKI would develop Virtual Pro Wrestling and WCW games on N64, and so WCW fans who wanted the best WCW games would have to pick up a Nintendo console. It was as simple as that. Nitro was also released on Nintendo 64, a baffling decision to say the least. Eventually, the WWF noticed how well received the WCW N64 games were, and so they partnered up with AKI, ditching Acclaim in the process. It's been reported that World Championship Wrestling didn't want to share the same developer as the World Wrestling Federation, although I'd believe that some sort of exclusivity deal was also in place there. And so WCW would end up teaming up with Electronic Arts or EA Games for their next PlayStation 1 game. Back then, EA had a slightly better reputation as both a developer and a publisher, and with their history in creating sports games, one would think that EA could possibly give AKI a run for their money. The thing is, EA didn't use their sports division to develop WCW Mayhem. They gave it off to Kodiak Interactive, a relatively new company that only had one game under their belt before working on Mayhem, a real-time strategy game known as Stratosphere Conquest of the Skies. After how well WCW Revenge sold on N64, you'd think EA would have developed the game in-house with at least one of their development teams, and the fact that development duties were handed off to an external company kinda tells us that EA didn't see WCW Mayhem as a priority. Kodiak would also develop a N64 version of WCW Mayhem that would effectively compete with AKI's WWF WrestleMania 2000, and fans spoke with their wallets here. WrestleMania was a much more successful game. It kinda imitated where the WWF and WCW were in real life. WCW had all the glory at one point, but the WWF made a comeback and Vince McMahon's promotion was once again the top dog. Okay, so let's take a look at Mayhem on PlayStation 1. I'm totally cheating here, by the way. I'm running the game upscaled via the DuckStation emulator, recommended by channel friend Guru Larry. I've upscaled the resolution here, added a bilinear filter, and also applied geometry and texture correction to stop those warped and wobbly polygons that were prevalent in PlayStation 1 games. So this is what Mayhem would usually look like.
Standing dropkick. He got it just.
And here it is using the enhancements available in DuckStation.
Very intelligent move.
His opponent will feel that tomorrow, maybe for a long time after.
Let's take a look at the menus here in the roster first of all. This is actually where WCW Mayhem shines in comparison to WCW games of the past. Quick Start lets you pick a wrestler and play against a random opponent. Main Event will let you set up a match, choose how many opponents you'll face, choose an arena, and choose a match stipulation. Every WCW pay-per-view event has an arena, with some needing unlocked and some classic arenas are also available to unlock. Although, to be fair, the developers definitely took some liberties when it came to stage designs and whatnot. If Mayhem was released today, you best bet EA would sell this stuff as DLC or some sort of bullshit subscription, but back in '99, all you had to do was beat the game a few times. What Mayhem also included though was the pay-per-view password system, and this was actually pretty unique. On WCW programming and on WCW's website, players could get passwords allowing them to recreate WCW pay-per-views. Of course, you could just set this up manually also, and it probably would be quicker to do that instead of typing in a password, but at least it was something different. The pay-per-view password system also let users enter cheat codes, so if you didn't want to play through the game to unlock everything, you could just enter the code in and you've got everything the game has to offer. Although once you turn off the game, all the characters will be gone again and you have to enter in the password again. Some unlockables have to be obtained via the password system though, so keep that in mind if you're trying to do things legit by playing through the whole game. One code changes Billy Kidman, Alex Wright, Stevie Ray and Wrath into random dudes and what's possibly models of their children. Maybe these guys were game developers and these were their kids, I don't know. Bit weird though, the models don't play well in game and, well, if you want to do some damage with Goldberg then go right ahead. Okay, let's go back and look at the roster before looking at a few matches. The roster is pretty decent, but it was also dated when Mayhem hit the shelves. And let's address this now, the character models look pretty bad. Not only do they look pretty bad, but who stands like this? Why does it look like wrestlers are pushing shopping trolleys? Bill Goldberg looks like a plumber, Barry Windham looks stoned. What did they do to Mean Gene Okerlund? What happened to Eric Bischoff? This is supposed to be Bobby Eaton. This is supposed to be Bobby Eaton. Alright, we have established the characters look bad, but I will say this though, the upscaling that DuckStation provides does give some improvements for certain wrestlers, so at least there's that. On the flip side of this though, we also see how truly bad some characters look when things get upscaled. This is actually horrific. I know too it's kinda unfair ripping into games of this era for how they looked, but even for PS1 standards, this was pretty bad. We've got some interesting character choices here. The roster is split up into multiple groups. WCW, NWO Black and White, NWO Wolfpack, the Horsemen, the Cruiserweights, and the Hardcore division. The Black and White NWO section is a barren wasteland, seeing as Hogan had jumped over to the red and black and the whole NWO Elite thing was going down. Scott Steiner, you're killing me. Fans of Bobby Blaze can now rejoice because he too is included in the Mayhem roster. There's definitely a good variety here of upper, mid and lower card guys, and for the time, it isn't a bad group of wrestlers we have here. Something that bugs me though is the loading time between wrestlers. It takes a few seconds to load the character model, but I guess implementing a character select in this fashion was a bit ambitious anyway. Normally you'd get a picture of the superstar like in Warzone or Attitude. Or you'd get Nitro and Thunder with the awesome rant feature.
Hey man, here's Alex Wright, the German. If you wanna know what the Germans are about, pick me and you're gonna have a hell of a victory. I promise!
The N64 version of Mayhem doesn't have this load time between wrestlers. You also have a Create a Wrestler mode where you can create your very own WCW abomination. There's a few templates here too, featuring WCW guys like Cyclope and also Kane, but not Kane. I'd spend most of my time listening to theme music here though. This was the first time many of these theme songs were available in good quality, as proper entrance music wasn't used in the N64 games. Thunder and Nitro had very short entrance videos, so it was good to get longer versions of some WCW theme songs. Create a Wrestler does have a fair few options though for its time. I've never been good at making wrestlers, but I'm sure some might enjoy the challenge here, trying to make somewhat decent looking superstars. Alright, so let's play the game. If you want to unlock characters, arenas, all that stuff, then you need to play Quest for the Best. Here you'll start off aiming for the TV title and then you'll work your way up to the World Heavyweight title. Once you have everything unlocked, or once you enter the cheat code to unlock everything the game has to offer, then all you really have left is exhibition matches. Quest for the Best is very straightforward though, it's just a string of matches that you need to play. I've used cheat codes here, so let's take a look at a few matches and check out the gameplay. First, we have Mean Gene Okerlund acting as the ring announcer.
Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to tonight's exclusive pay-per-view event, Bash at the Beach. It is scheduled for one fall. There will be no time limit.
The entrances are a mix between scary and funny. The animation is all over the place, but let's press on. You'll notice that Bobby Heenan and Tony Schiavone provide commentary for WCW Mayhem, and for its time, the commentary was actually really good.
Right now, his opponent thinks he's in a different state of confusion.
It does get repetitive eventually, but compared to Warzone or Attitude, Mayhem's commentary is way better.
It all gets put on the line out there. One mistake, and you can become lunch meat.
Down here we have the momentum meter. At first glance you might think it's just like the spirit meter from the N64 games, but there are some minor changes. The more moves you do and the more you change things up, the more powerful your moves become. If the crowd cheers while you change up your moves, the momentum meter will fill up. If the crowd boos when you're pulling off repetitive moves, or if your opponent is beating the shit out of you, then the meter goes down. Fill up the momentum meter and you'll be able to pull off your finishing move and hopefully score a victory. So that's the gist of what you're attempting to accomplish here during a match. Basic moves within the game are very limited and you've got guys pulling off moves you'd never see at the time. So for example, you've got Hulk Hogan pulling off drop kicks, something he just didn't do this late in WCW. From a lockup, you've got around 9 moves you can pull off by using triangle, square or X, either alone or with the up and down direction buttons. And the same is true for strike moves. Pressing a button on its own will perform a standard strike, while pressing a button with up or down will perform a power strike. L1 is your block and counter button, R1 will make you run, R2 pulls off a taunt, and you can check out how to do everything else by pausing the game and checking out the moves list. This is super handy by the way, and it helped me big time when trying to remember how to play this thing. The hit detection isn't great in WCW Mayhem, as you can see right here. This is going to feel very clunky when you first play, and that's going to turn a lot of people off, but you do adjust to it after a few matches, and I gotta say, I actually had a lot of fun here after learning how to play the game again. It doesn't take long at all before you're back in this era of WCW and you're putting guys away with diamond cutters and jackknife power bombs. The hit detection is a problem though that you have to overcome. You have to learn the timing of everything in order to successfully land moves, and no matter how good you get, you'll still get screwed over with punches going through your opponents and all that shit. The general movement of characters isn't great, and that's something you need to keep in mind when playing the game, but you do adapt over time. A typical one-on-one match won't be over in a matter of seconds. You do have to earn that momentum by changing things up, and once you get into the groove, you'll be able to pull off your finisher after a little bit of work. I will say though that easy and medium difficulties are just too easy. Play this one on hard and you'll get way more enjoyable matches with the AI actually countering and making you work harder for your finishing move. Speaking of countering, it seems to happen at random sometimes. I set up a few 2-player games just to capture footage here, and the CPU randomly took over and began countering my moves. That's a bit unfair. Run-ins can happen during matches too. It can take a long time for an interfering superstar to get back out of the ring, so I just prefer to turn these off. On the outside of the ring you'll find a few steel chairs, and you won't get disqualified for using them either, strangely. But what WCW Mayhem actually done before any other wrestling game was allow players to go to different backstage areas. This doesn't seem like much today, and the backstage areas themselves are nothing but giant square rooms with a few objects littered around the place, but this was the first time fans could fight in different areas around the arena. All of this can be done in basic one-on-one matches, but you also have the option of playing weapons matches, no DQ matches, and matches contested under Raven's rules, all of which are very similar, with the only difference being the amount of weapons that are available and whether you can pin an opponent outside of the ring. Again, WCW Mayhem isn't the best WCW game by far. There's way better choices out there, and your choices should start at the Nintendo 64. Mayhem doesn't compare to Revenge or World Tour, but that doesn't mean it's all bad, it just takes a little time to get into. Speaking of the N64, here's Mayhem on Nintendo's console. What you get here is pretty much the same game, though keep in mind I've upscaled the N64 version also, so this looks way better than the original. Both versions more or less play the same, there's no big differences that I can see when it comes to gameplay. I actually think the N64 version looks a bit better than the PlayStation version even without the upscaling, but why would you buy Mayhem on N64 when you could just buy WCW Revenge instead? The thing is though, I'm using emulators here with loads of enhancements, I can't give a fair assessment of which one is better. You do get less commentary on the N64 version, but I also think you get a slightly smoother gameplay experience, but again, that could be the emulators doing. There is another completely different version of Mayhem I want to show you though, and that's the Game Boy Color release. This one was handled by a completely different development team, 2N Productions. From what I can gather, they too only released one other game before working on Mayhem, and that was 007 The World Is Not Enough, also for Game Boy Color. EA published this 007 game also. After working on these two Game Boy games, 2N moved on to mobile gaming on the iPhone, and it looks like the company no longer exists. Now, as far as wrestling games on the Game Boy go, Mayhem isn't completely horrible. The roster has been seriously cut down, of course, but you still get 12 superstars to pick from, including Sting, Goldberg, DDP, Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart. Some characters look pretty good, while others they're just wrong. Knowing the Game Boy has its limitations, the developers decided to make this one over the top with cartoony characters and over the top moves. And it does work for a handheld game. They even included a locker room area and an alleyway to fight in. I like how some random guy is just laid out there in the locker room. There are some things that hold it back though. For example, there's nothing you can do to a grounded opponent except try a top rope move. Pulling off grapples seems to be a luck of the draw thing, and there's a very limited amount of moves you can do. And the only true difference between superstars is how they look and their finishing move. Again, it's the Game Boy, you don't expect miracles here. I think WWF Superstars on the Game Boy is way better, but this isn't so bad. It's just like the console versions though, where you need to stick with it for a few matches before you start to find a rhythm. But again, just like the console versions, most people probably wouldn't bother because there's better options available. There's also no save feature and no password feature, so if you want to complete the game, you gotta beat everyone in one sitting. And that, I feel, is way too much to ask. Not a great game, but you can do worse. Just going back to the PS1 version to wrap this up, I think those who had Mayhem and those who didn't play the previous Nintendo 64 games would tell you straight up that back then, Mayhem was actually a decent wrestling game and not as bad as what you might think. Like many games of this era though, today it hasn't aged well at all, and it's sometimes very difficult to look at Mayhem without laughing at the graphics and how it all looks. The AKI games were awesome back then, and they're still great fun to play nowadays, so WCW games like Mayhem were, and still are, pretty much redundant. It feels more like a novelty to play today. I do remember getting into it though when it was first released, but even I knew the N64 was where the big boys played and Mayhem just couldn't compete with the AKI games. And with WrestleMania 2000 getting released around the same time period, using WWF Superstars with the AKI engine was just a much better prospect than sticking with Mayhem. The SmackDown games would also come out soon afterwards, and WCW and EA decided to release Backstage Assault towards the end of 2000, putting a nail in WCW's video game coffin, but that's a story for another time. I will say this though, looking at Mayhem, especially in YouTube videos like this, will give the impression that it's totally not worth your time, and the game will come across as a relic from the past. But give it a go and actually play it. Play more than one match, play 3 or 4, and you might realise that WCW Mayhem was a game that you overlooked. You will have to overcome some of the game's flaws, but once you do, you might find yourself enjoying this one. It's not perfect, there are better choices, but give it a go and let me know what you think in the comments. If you hate it, at least you can listen to Disco Inferno's theme song over and over again. Thanks for watching this one, guys. Thanks for putting up with my bad throat, and take care.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'll tell you how to make stuff as fast as faces. You gotta mix with a lower frequency. The lower you go, the more you show, you know. Yeah, yeah, yeah.